Welcome, Ben. We are so lucky to have Benjamin Recht here. Benjamin is the latest guest for the Accad and Koka report. He is a professor at the University of California, Berkeley, Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Sciences. And he has a pretty distinguished CV. He spent some time at MIT, and he does a lot of work on the topic that we want to discuss with him today, which is seemingly hot, and it's been hot for the last, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years that I've been kind of paying attention to this, and seemingly getting hotter and hotter is machine learning and artificial intelligence in medicine. And we've been meaning to bring Ben on to talk about this for a while, but then I was somewhat triggered by a speaker, a very animated, excitable speaker, who was talking about how artificial intelligence is going to change the landscape of medicine, and it was an interesting presentation where there was a bunch of different articles that were kind of cited, and I knew that we had this. We talked to Ben earlier about this, so I desperately wanted to bring Ben on to talk about what he thinks about artificial intelligence, machine learning in medicine, and kind of give us his analysis, because he as opposed to most doctors like us who kind of, we view AI and machine learning as this kind of black box thing that gives us some answers. This Ben actually peers inside the black box and gives us, and can give us a very a good perspective from there. So Ben, sorry for the long monologue, but welcome and thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. That was very nice, and I'm really excited to talk to you both. This has been a topic that's been AI in medicine, whatever that might be, has been of interest to me for since I started doing machine learning in the first place. And it's relevant and trendy now. And I know we've spoke behind the scenes, and I think the listeners will quickly find out that the three of us are fairly like-minded about the value of machine learning to medicine now. And I think, honestly, moving forward, I think we actually share a lot of let's not spoil it just yet, but I feel like we're not going to disagree too much.
So Ben, let's start with some definitions about what machine learning is.
Yes. See, now, and I think this is the best part, because most of the time now it's called artificial intelligence, which just sounds so, I don't know, it sounds so fancy, and people think about Asimov's books or the Terminator movie or something. Anytime you call it AI, it makes it sound much more fancy than it is. I for a long time called it machine learning, but it turns out there's an older term which I prefer, which is just pattern recognition. And I think that's the most honest. And I feel like if we called it that, no one would be interested, but at least we'd all, understand what it is. Maybe just to back up, I think it's useful to kind of go through a definition of machine learning or pattern recognition for physicians. I think not all MDs, but we're supposed to train MDs to understand tests and how to make diagnostics from tests. I don't know if that's fair. Would you guys agree with that? So most doctors I speak to know what sensitivity and specificity are for a particular test. So what is a test anyway? What does it do? It looks at some attributes of our patient, and based on that, it's going to give us an answer as to whether or not it thinks the patient has a condition or not, right? A test comes back with an answer of positive for a condition or negative for a condition. We associate with that test some notion of precision and accuracy, right? Which we'll have as specificity and sensitivity. And what we do with that test then very much depends on context, right? I mean, it's not just that you get the test back, you say, cool, thank you, test. Now all of the rules are set in stone, right? A test is one piece of information that goes into a very complex diagnostic plan, and it goes into a very complex treatment plan. Okay, so hopefully, just want to make sure we all agree at least there. Okay, so what is machine learning? machine learning or pattern recognition is how you build tests from data alone, from past labeled data alone. We could consider that we have a bunch of retrospective patients. They have some set of attributes that we have associated with them probably in their EMR at this point, but wherever you have a chart or some kind of record of their information. And then you have a diagnosis of each of these patients. And then from that information, whatever you're giving here, and it could be some kind of radiology information, it could be blood work, it could just be demographic data, whatever that is. You try to build a test that accurately gives you the diagnosis from only those kind of features, right? That's all machine learning is. Now it's complicated. I mean, I think the simplest version that you would both know would be linear regression. That is a kind of machine learning where we would take some simple tests and then, or logistic regression, maybe slightly more complicated. But when you get down to it, there's some fancy machinery that you can build on top, but it's nothing more. What is actually functionally happening is we take retrospective data, we have retrospective labeled diagnoses, sorry. And from that, we're going to get an algorithm that will take a new patient data and spit out a test. And that test will spit out a diagnosis. So it's just a test, right? And that will have a sensitivity and will have a specificity just like every other test. And then you have to use it probably just like every other test in the context of the history of how you use the test. So that's what pattern recognition is. Is that going to transform medicine? I don't know why it would, but you have to tell me. We have to figure out and dive in a little bit more about.
One of the interesting things about you using that phrase, pattern recognition, which is not nearly as sexy. And I think in one of your YouTube talks, you alluded to the fact that you're going to be, I mean, you just referenced it as well. You're not going to be able to raise nearly as much money as, when you come out and say, I have this awesome pattern recognition tool versus, I have AI that's going to do or machine learning. But the fascinating thing about, and I neglected, because I'm a bad introducer, neglected the fact that you've written a book, which, because you're clearly a socialist at Berkeley, is free.
For now.
Yeah, pulling you to the dark side, Ben.
No. Well, Princeton
But
University Press is going to make it so that you could pay for it if you chose, which is nice.
Okay.
They're very kind.
The book is called Patterns, Predictions, and Actions. It's a story about machine learning. It's two authors, Ben, yourself, and Moritz Hart. And you sent this to us, and you sent it to me before as well. And it's a wonderful introduction, and it gives you this beautiful, and I recommend anyone who has any interest to go through it. It's a fantastic timeline of where we are now in terms of machine learning AI and where we come from. And you can see why, Ben is saying that, AI is nothing but, basically pattern recognition, with some frills here and there. But fascinatingly, and on your YouTube lecture online, you have the actual clip from the New York Times in the 50s. Right? I mean, it's so great, right? And the quote from the New York Times in 1958, the Navy revealed the embryo of an electronic computer that it expects will be able to walk, talk, see, write, reproduce itself, and be conscious of its existence. So I mean, 1958, and this, I'm sure you could lift this. I'm sure the same thing is verbatim in some slide in some pitch deck somewhere. Correct. So
that's right.
It's fantastic.
I mean, if you're on Twitter and you follow anyone from OpenAI, they tweet stuff like that every day. This is a company in San Francisco. They spend all their time on Twitter writing things like that in tweet form. So
Hindus, we believe in reincarnation. So
okay.
They're basically reincarnated avatars of reincarnated souls from before. But so tell me, I mean, clearly, I mean something actually something has changed. Simplistically to a doctor, logistic regression, linear regression, you have a bunch of points, you fit a model to it, and then it allows you to go into the future and say, all right, well, in the future, this is what it's going to be. So is there something, is there really nothing much that has changed to go from that to what we have now? I mean, what are they doing that's different?
I think there are two things that have changed that I think are important. I think, first of all, with artificial intelligence, the funny thing about the academic discipline or even the social discipline is it comes in and out of pattern recognition. Like it makes grandiose claims, but then the only thing that ends up working is pattern recognition. And then everyone gets bored and we have an AI winter. And then computers get faster and we get bigger data sets and we discover pattern recognition again. And then we make grandiose claims, and AI has all sorts of things that they want to do. So I think many people will remember Watson, which is a completely different setup. And that was making some really grandiose claims of what it could do. And then they shut it down. So, cause it didn't work. So AI has this kind of ebb and flow around pattern recognition, but pattern recognition is this constant backbone. And what does change is that computers get faster and data sets get bigger. And then we realize these things that we had been doing that stopped working, that weren't great, worked better. So really, like, as you might expect, if the whole core to pattern recognition is the set of retrospective data that you use to build your model, you need to have that data and be able to process that data, you know, quickly enough that you don't get bored, right? It can't take 5 months. I found this great story of folks doing pattern recognition in the 50s, and you know, they were doing character recognition, and each character was stored on a punch card. So it's just a different, right? You could imagine having, you know, 1,000 or 2,000 punch cards that you have to feed into a machine. That's a very different setup, a very different set of things you could do than, you know, if you have these laptops that you and I are all speaking on, where we are sending video to each other, you know, across the country right now. I mean, technology has evolved. And as that technology gets faster, these ideas, which again, the ideas of regression, the ideas behind prediction are super powerful, but they get more powerful as the technology improves and as the, you know, the more retrospective data you can gather, probably the more you're covering the set of all possibilities.
So there's some things that are getting better. By the way, that's a fantastic story. I forget who the two researchers were. There was somebody in Bell Labs on the East Coast, and there's some research in the West Coast, and the guy in the West Coast wanted the data, and so this guy like basically took a shoebox and put all the punch cards in it, like a copy of them, I guess, and mailed them out to. And apparently they're sitting in some basement somewhere in Berkeley, and we don't know where it is.
I think they're going to be at Stanford, and this is what I gave this talk at Stanford, hoping to find them, but I don't know. I still have not tracked them down.
But clearly, I mean, there's some amazing things we're doing. I mean, for instance, natural language processing, correct? I mean, Alexa, Siri, they really talk.
Absolutely.
I mean, so those are some big time advances that I guess it hit a dead end, and then because of processor speed and because of now getting more data points and stuff. But so differentiate. So if we're doing so well there, right? Why is it that we are so amazingly good? I mean, just in my lifetime, in the last 10 years, my goodness, when I used to try to dictate and get things, when I used Dragon, I used Dragon like 10 years ago or so, right? Dragon 10 years ago was not very good. Now my darn iPhone, right? Just whatever it does on its own, has even for medical stuff,
it's amazing.
It does very, very well. And it seems amazing. It feels like it's learning as I'm correcting. You know what I mean? So I don't know if
I'm not sure if it's learning or you're learning. I'm not sure. This is never clear. It's a little hard. We are human. I think that's one of the fun things with a lot of these tools, these interactive tools, like the ones that were in Google Docs that make suggestions to you. You know, you're part of that loop. So even if it doesn't make a perfect suggestion, it might trigger something to make it better. And you might learn to adapt what you do to Alexa. You might, you know, when you're talking to the Alexa, you figure out how to talk so Alexa hears you. But Alexa has to work at some decent level before you're even going to be willing to do that. Right. And I think it is undeniable that speech to text has over the last decade improved. It's to the point where everybody is willing to use it. Now, why?
Let's exactly why. Yeah, why? Why is that?
Like, how much data did they train on? It is immense.
Yeah,
it is immense. I know. I don't know about Amazon exactly their size of their corpus. I had spoken with people who had worked on speech recognition at Google, and they were also doing text to speech. And just the scale of those data sets is so large. In natural language processing, some of the big language models that people are currently using, they use, all of Reddit or all of Wikipedia to train, to as their basis. And the way they work, actually, it's very, this is not related to medicine, but it is kind of a beautiful idea. What they do is you'll take sentences or snippets of text, and then you'll delete words and have them as blank. And the pattern recognition task is what words should go in those blanks. And that becomes your automatic corpus. That's your automatic representative retrospective data. So it's that you could generate it for free because you just scrape the internet, you get a bunch of text, and then you just delete things and create examples of problems of what fill in the blank problems. And from that, you can do amazing things, just absolutely amazing. But now think of the scale of the Wikipedia to the scale of any of these studies that we might look at today.
Oh yeah, no question.
I mean, the ones that we're supposed to tell the audience, Anish prepped me with a few studies. He sent me some things that he thought were a little bit exuberant, and they're talking about 1,000 people.
Right.
It's just not the same number.
Okay. So, but clearly it's not, there's got to be something else fundamental, right? More than just the amount of data to crunch, because of course, me, well, not Michelle, because Michelle is unplugged from us because he's smarter than us. Cardiologists like me who are sitting in EMRs and like tapping away and putting all this structured data, non-structured data. I mean, there's obviously massive amounts of data now that we're putting into electronic health record systems, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so the issue cannot be, not having enough data, but there's something else, right? It has to do with, is it the cleanness of the data? And is it about gold standard? It's like, in speaking, there's a gold standard, like, I mean, whereas in so much else, we find it's like, whoa, what exactly is the gold standard? And so,
I think there's a couple interesting things when you look at what they're sourcing the large language models. Wikipedia is a massive cooperative project.
Right.
So many people go on and spend so much time editing, revising, commenting, making sure that copy is good.
Right.
How many people look at any one EMR?
Right.
Somebody's chart. Usually it's usually, I mean, actually, no, I don't know. How many people would look at somebody's electronic medical record? One patient.
How many people would look at it?
Yeah.
I mean, in a course of one hospital stay or something like that, or
maybe over the course of 2 years.
2 years. Oh my God. I don't know. I mean, I guess, well, maybe ancillary staff included. I don't know, 100 people.
100.
Maybe.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So that's more than I would expect.
I mean, just large systems. So there's nurses, there's medical staff, medical techs that are documenting there's doctors, so maybe over 2 years.
Go in and tell like a personal attending, hey, this is messed up. You should, like, the person's primary care.
Nobody has looked at it in terms of making sure the information is correct and that sort of thing.
That's what I meant.
Right.
Okay. All right.
No.
All right. So that's very important. That's very important. Because everyone knows the saying "garbage in, garbage out," but it's incredibly important in machine learning as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing, and that's going to be a block for a lot of medical tasks.
So the data set for speech and stuff was way cleaner than the data set, because possibly for EMRs, because an EMR has probably made things worse. So in terms of AI and anyway.
It's interesting. I mean, I'm not sure how. I mean, there are standard data sets that, we might use with students for speech that are very curated to be very high quality. I'm not sure at the industrial scale what the quality of those are, but, there's still so much quality engineering that goes in. And I think there's another thing that's actually very tricky. And this is something that I also always tell people. I try to teach every student, if they come out of my class, they should know that you should only use machine learning if the answer of the question you're asking is unambiguous and the stakes are very low. And I think that's just never true in a diagnostic setting. I don't think there ever is a true diagnosis. I mean, I think our only bias resistant endpoints are death. That one, okay, you can mark that. You can predict. Hard to come back from that. But we have so much ambiguity in what a diagnosis means that that's already a problem.
Right, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Because the diagnosis, people imagine, I mean, again, speaking about machine learning, it's a false, when you know, especially I assume many engineers, and in fact, when I have patients who have engineers, they tend to think in those terms. They tend to think that a diagnosis is like a configuration of the body in a certain way, which it is not. It is not the way, right? A defect in a, you know, in a clock or a toaster or whatnot, we do a faulty configuration of the toaster, and a diagnosis is not that. And ultimately, a diagnosis is a convention among people in the, you know, it's a term of arts. I mean, it's people who are in the business, you know, apply these labels because it helps them do what they want to do, and therefore it evolves over time, typically, right? So what we mean by myocardial infarction today is not the same as what was meant 20 years ago, and it won't be the same. And so all these projects that, you know, are, you know, excited to learn, you know, to have the computers learn these things. They're learning. It's like a mirage, right? They're learning the thing that evolves, right?
Yeah, just to echo what Michelle is saying, you know, you sent me that paper by Ziad Obermeyer, who's an ER physician, I believe, and he, you know, and I was reading the paper, and you know, I got lost in some of the. I mean, I don't think a guy like me doesn't have to know the math of it, I think, but you know, the assumptions are what's important to me, right? It's like, okay, and one of the assumptions that he was making, because you have to make some assumptions, right? One of the assumptions he's making is that value relates to if a patient who presents with diagnosis X ends up getting revascularized, right? And these are all patients who were not in some of these. Anyway, the point is that all because somebody comes into a hospital and ends up getting a stent, right, does not necessarily mean the right thing happened. You know, because there's, you know, it may seem like it, you know, but we've established, you know, over time that has changed so much, right? The number of stents, the number of elective stents that have gone in has massively decreased because guess what? We realized that we're putting in too many stents, right? So, you know, these things, they're big time moving targets. There's something as fundamental as that. So you're talking about the gold standard there in that study being like, well, wait a second. The moment I read that, I was like, that's not an assumption that you could be clearly safe with, right? Anyway, so that's one aspect, right? But I sent you a paper that I would love you to kind of go into, and I'm gonna try to I'm gonna see if this works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But otherwise, I'll kind of paraphrase. But I'm gonna try to play the little snippet. All right.
Okay. A small example from a recent study a few years ago, Nature Communication, that just shows machine learning, how it basically beats human in detection of an EKG of acute coronary syndrome. And I just wanted to show this example because, and I'm not going to go into the statistical methods, but this is a graph that you're going to have to get used to because there's going to be more and more studies involving artificial intelligence. This study is called Receiver Operating Characteristic, ROC. But the bottom line here is the higher the graph, like the blue graph that you can see, the better the accuracy, the sensitivity, and the specificity. You want to be as higher as possible, okay? Get used to this because you're going to see a lot of studies in the next few years like this. So in this specific case, this study that I showed you, the black line is the computer versus other models, including humans. And obviously it outperforms. What I didn't like about it.
Okay, so you could all hear that, right?
Yes.
And so basically, you know, I mean, you know, it shows some paper, which I'm gonna put up I'm gonna share a screen in a second, which basically suggests that there's an ROC curve. There's an ROC curve of some machine learning model. Some model that they did, which is based on predicting certain things from an EKG. You know, predicting MIs. You know, MIs from an EKG. Something that's pretty darn significant and something that we want to know. And if you're saying that AI/machine learning can somehow look at an EKG and pick up things and subtleties that we aren't seeing, and is better, you know, that is better than a cardiologist at figuring out whether somebody is going to have a heart attack or not, is having a heart attack or not. That's pretty darn significant, right?
Right.
And I wanted to play that because the way it's presented is like, look at this study. This study shows that the ROC curves are clearly better. And I mean, this is so, I mean, what's the issue, correct? So Ben, the paper.
I have I have it here. I'm looking at it now.
Excellent. I am going to share. Am I allowed to share the screen?
I think you can. Yeah.
Yeah, I can. Okay, I'm sharing it right now. All right, can you see it?
Oh, I love this plot. Actually,
All right, so there it is. So,
I really
and
don't.
there's so much to learn from guys like Ben. So Ben, I mean, again, the study is about trying to show that, you know, expert EKG read is in purple.
Yeah.
The auto ECG read, which is the EKG thing that it prints out based on its own little algorithm that it's doing, is in red. And then there's the machine learning fusion model, which appears to kick everyone's butt.
Right. Now, there's so much about this plot I want to talk about. The first thing, do you know what a ROC curve is? And
yeah,
you know
I mean, right. We know. I mean, I think it'd be good for the audience, especially people, because we may have some podcast audience members who are not seeing this graph here.
Oh, true. Good. They're not seeing the graph, so I could say let me talk. I love.
Oh yeah, talk us through the graph.
Talking about ROC curves. They're some of my they're so misused. First of all, no one knows what ROC stands for. It's receiver operating characteristic. And this is a term that was invented to describe the properties of radar systems in World War II. So this is the receiver operator characteristic was about detecting whether or not enemy missiles or planes were coming at us. So it's called yet we have the term stuck around. You call it ROC. We forget where it comes from. That's fine. I find that I just like that old story about what's happening. Now, what you plot is on the x-axis, you plot the 1 minus your specificity. So that would be like your false positive rate. How frequently are we going to declare a positive result when we should have said false, when the true diagnosis was not. On the x-axis, sorry, the y-axis, we plot sensitivity, which is our true positive rate. You know, how frequently do we declare a positive test when the condition is present? Okay, so that's what we're plotting against each other. These things fight, right? Your false positive and true positive rates have to fight. Because if I just said true all the time, the test always returns positive, then your true positive rate will be 100 because you're always 100%. But at that point, your false positive rate will also be 100%. You'll be saying the wrong thing every time you're declaring true all the time, but whenever it's false, you'll be wrong. Now, the opposite end of the spectrum is if you always declare false, your true positive rate is 0, and your false positive rate is also 0. You're never saying positive. And so you want to get somewhere in between there. And also you'd probably like you don't want your false positive rate to be equal to your true positive rate. That doesn't seem good either, right? So you would like your sensitivity to be higher than 1 minus the specificity. So what the receiver operating characteristic does is for a particular test, usually you can set the specificity. And if anyone has ever done a trial, usually you declare in advance what the specificity of the trial should be. What is the acceptable false positive rate for a trial? And oftentimes for tests, you also would set that. You say, what's my acceptable false positive rate? And then your goal, once you set that false positive rate, is to maximize the number of true positives. Not always, but typically, sometimes maybe you want to maximize positive predictive value. There are other concepts, but it turns out that you could tend to, as you change the specificity, you're obviously going to get a different sensitivity, and the ROC curve just traces out what's possible. What's out there, what is possible. So it's an interesting conception. It has no value to clinicians because in the clinic, you only care about one value on this curve. You're going to have some specificity. You're going to have some sensitivity. I don't know why you care about the operating characteristic, yet it's become a convention. And everything I looked at before we talked is a very common convention in machine learning in medicine, not in machine learning more generally, but definitely in machine learning in medicine, to report how much area lies under this curve that is traced out in specificity sensitivity space. People really like that. I think the reason they like that is, the closer the curve gets to the corner where you have perfect sensitivity and perfect specificity, the better. And so they kind of use the area under the curve as a proxy.
So Ben, is it not like, when you're deciding on a test, on a particular test, whether the test is positive or negative, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times, you're not dealing with something that's binary, right? Like, for instance, with heart attacks and biomarkers, the level of the biomarker, the level of the cardiac enzyme, level of a troponin, right? Which is, troponin is when heart muscle gets damaged, there are enzymes that leak. You can measure those enzymes. If you have a lot of different heart muscle that's damaged, you get more enzyme that leaks, right?
That's right.
The issue is, of course, you have to then go make a decision about, all right, at what point do you say this is a heart attack or not? It's this, we're constantly trying to categorize continuous variables, correct?
Well, it's interesting, Anish. Let me put, I just want to kind of like slightly change that. I mean, it's not that you even have to decide whether there's a heart attack. You just have to decide at what level do I do something?
Yes, right, exactly.
Like, at what point do I treat, or what treatment do I do? So it's almost like this, like you're saying with this binariness, it's like, it doesn't really matter if you've found a heart attack. It's like, do I have to intervene to save this person's life, and how am I going to do it?
Yeah, and a lot of times that's how the thresholds are set. The thresholds are set based on, okay, once we cross this line, okay, we're probably kind of do something actionable. It's very, I think it's, right. So of course, and what the context is matters. I mean, what you're looking for matters a lot, right? So correct. If you're looking for something like that's relatively benign, it's like, is this somebody who is going to lose all their hair or not? I mean, that may be important to most young men, perhaps, but
less for us older guys.
It's not. But what exactly, where you draw your threshold for that, may not matter as much if you have some test you're doing to test for that, as somebody who's coming to the ER with chest pain, and now you have to put a cutoff as like, all right, below this cutoff, we're going to say they're not having a heart attack and they go home. If it's above this number, hey, you need a cardiology consult, and you may be having a heart attack, and you may need a catheterization tomorrow, and that's a big deal, right?
Yes.
And so in terms of if you, depending on where you set your threshold, right, Ben, for these tests, you'll get a different sensitivity and specificity based on that, right? I mean, if you set your bar really, really low, right, your sensitivity will be super high, but hey, you'll get a lot more false positives. That tension that you're talking about.
That's right.
But there you're not setting specificity or anything like that. You're just varying your threshold of what's positive and negative, and then you're generating an ROC curve based on that. Is that right?
So hilariously,
is that one other way to think about it?
That's all they're doing here.
Yeah,
that's all they're doing here. Right. Hey, that's great. Exactly. They're changing the threshold. The threshold is just on the output, whatever comes out of, I think in this case, a neural network. It has a number. That number is between 0 and 1. And you set a threshold. How high do I need that number to be before I declare positive? And based on the value of that threshold, I trace out this curve. That's all that's happening here.
Right. And this curve, I mean, you picked up on it right away. I mean, I looked at this curve and I was like, that looks really weird. I've never seen an ROC curve where there's like a straight line, right? And you actually picked up on it right away, because I actually didn't notice, on the left of the inflection point, there's basically an inflection point.
Yes.
So the inflection point.
Here's the complicated thing with ROC curves is that you said with troponin you could vary the level, and you could actually trace out a whole sensitivity specificity spectrum. If I just give you a point, so an expert, that's just going to be 1 point. An expert is going to have one level of sensitivity and specificity. So I can't get a curve. And what people will commonly do is they'll just connect. And this is just, you should never do this. It is a valid curve, but it's just not corresponding to anything of value to anyone else. Is you connect the point where you always declare positives to the point of the expert to the point where you always declare negatives. That will be a valid ROC curve, but it's for a really stupid test. It's for a really, really stupid test. That test that comes out is the following. You don't take the expert opinion. What you do is you flip a coin, and with some probability, you declare positive. And with the other probability, you ask the expert. That's the purple line. That's the purple line in this paper that they're comparing the neural net to.
Right.
And like, yeah, that's stupid, but no one would ever do that. Like that's a crazy comparison. And in fact, this is the kind of thing that, like, if I got a paper with this plot, it would have been an immediate, like, I not only would have rejected the paper, but I would have written a very angry email to the editor who didn't desk reject it. So
reviewer number 2, Ben Recht.
it's not review. I mean, reviewer number 2 has like, is kind of mean, but like, I would just, I mean, this is egregious. I don't understand how you can get away with publishing.
Just to go over that again, because I know for the clinicians or
I know
I'm gonna push this on YouTube, on the YouTube link. Usually we'll just put the podcast link because I want them to see this.
Yeah.
But Ben, you sent this back saying no. What they did was the expert, right?
Yeah.
Because the expert, what happened here is the expert looks at the EKG and decides whether or not this is an MI or not. So the expert cannot vary his own threshold. I guess you can kind of try to do that, but you can't really do that. So yeah,
I mean,
okay,
what I'm guessing they gave the expert a bunch of these EKG reads or ECG reads, and they just asked, what do you think? And then that person answered accordingly, you know.
And that gives them and that gives them a certain sensitivity and a certain specificity, because they got a bunch of EKGs. They were blind to the outcome, and they said, read the EKG and tell us if this person's having a heart attack.
What do you think happened?
So that only gives you one data point. That doesn't give you an ROC curve, and that one data point is the star that Ben has here, right?
Yeah, that's a very horrible picture we have.
In order for them to generate
PowerPoint, it's like 2 seconds.
Did you use machine learning to generate this
No,
picture?
sir. I use Microsoft PowerPoint.
So the sensitivity is 0.4 and the specificity is whatever. And that's the point. That's the one point they had from the expert. And to generate the ROC curve, they drew a line from here to here, and then another line from here to 1. And this line here is, it's a line. It's that 50-50 thing. So So then but then what they went and did in the paper is say, oh, look, the best, the machine learning model is awesome because we were able to get, based on training and stuff. This is what they said. And you tell me, I mean, they said that, this point somewhere here is better than obviously this point over here.
Well, the way that they compare these curves is the area under the curve. They just measure how much area is below the graph. And the reason why is because if you could fill the whole space up, this space goes from 0, 1, and it goes from 0, 1 in the other direction, and you can get area of 1. That means you're perfect always. That means you have a perfect test. So area, it's kind of a proxy for how perfect. It's a terrible proxy. I can show you 2 curves with exactly the same area that you wouldn't know which one to use. They're not it's not useful for comparing models, and I really hate it as a convention. I don't think it provides any information whatsoever. I think the other really interesting thing about that plot is that the expert actually had the exact same performance given a fixed specificity. But given the expert specificity, the neural net was the same. They're indistinguishable. And
at that one point, it's the same. So the only reason the expert is worse is because you drew this line.
Because you drew this line in. Yeah. So it's
but here's the table, Ben. I mean, explain to me, because it looks like what they're doing in terms of comparing and saying, hey, machine learning fusion model is so much better, is because they're taking the best point in that curve, the one that's the most to the top left.
I was confused by this table as well. I don't know where these numbers came from. I know where the numbers come from for the expert. That one's easy. But I don't know what's happening for their MI fusion, where they get these. Like
I think they're getting. I think these are. I mean, I assume they were the top left area, meaning that
the only reason I'm concerned is I don't understand how they got error bars, which they're listing here, but who knows?
Okay.
Everybody gets error bars in their own special ways. So I don't know. I'm never sure, but what we're seeing here is it's interesting that the positive predictive value of the neural net is much worse than that of the expert. If we like positive predictive value, I don't know.
No, but that's because as you vary, I don't know. You're right. I don't know where exactly these numbers come from, but there's some point somewhere along the curve somewhere maybe, but the specificity drops. Right. So the expert was pretty darn good at saying, okay, if this doesn't show an MI, you're not, well, I mean, that's negative predictive value, but the point is, if you don't have disease, the EKG isn't showing something, which is kind of what specificity is. That was pretty good for the expert. And in order to get that higher sensitivity, the specificity in the machine learning model, I guess, dropped, and which leads to a lower positive predictive value for somebody coming to the ER with, some symptom. And then predicting that that person is having an MI based on the EKG. This is spun as a positive trial, but there's a variety of problems. I mean, the ROC curve that you pointed out. I mean,
the other thing I don't get is that they have some system that just does an automated EKG read, and its positive predictive value and negative predictive value are pretty good. What are we improving on here? I'm confused.
Anish and I sometimes have to rage tweet at each other. It happens.
No, I think the complicated thing here, and I think you sent me a few things from a talk you went to. I mean, there's been so much hope for better automated tools in medicine. It's always unclear. I think so let me step back a little bit. In 2016, I could find you quotes from AI experts who are talking about how doctors are going to be out of business. Jeff Hinton says that radiologists, if they, are like Wile E. Coyote, like they don't even know the floor has been pulled out from under them. He says that in 2016. And Andrew Ng says radiologists have to look for new jobs. And Jeremy Howard goes on and talking about how, like, no, we can automate so much of medical imaging and medical reads. In 5 years from now, everybody, it will be completely automated. They said this in 2016. So they were wrong. They're very wrong. They're audaciously, insultingly wrong. And I don't understand why people in AI insist on doing this stuff all the time. It's not in anyone's interest. But it got people excited. There's a lot of stuff out there. And I think that the current thing that people are excited about, so people have given up on the putting radiologists out of jobs, but the current thing people are excited about is like, well, what if we could like put stuff on AppleWatches? Like, is that going to add value? But it's just kind of pushing the buck further down the road, I guess.
Right.
In terms of understanding, why they're wrong. I mean, imagine sort of a thought experiment where you take one of those AI enthusiasts and ask them what they would do if they had chest pain, and we have their algorithm interpret the EKG, and no human being overreads it. And it goes directly from the machine to the stent being placed or not being placed. Right? Without any human being sort of have complete, human decisions completely taken out. I mean, suppose the technology, right? I mean, if the technology improves to the point that they expect that it will, imagine medical care being carried out without any human intervention. So on the one hand, I can say I can imagine some saying, yes, this will be, but there will be a rate of, there'll be, patients who at the end of the intervention, at the end of the treatment are not happy, right? Or they're dead. And we will have to take it on faith that the machine got it right. Somehow, whether the stent was used or not, necessary, unnecessary, and whatnot. So, I can't imagine. I think they may say that they would accept such a world. I doubt that in practice they would.
That's such an interesting way to put it too. Something that really resonated with me. Another thing we were promised by 2020 was fleets of self-driving cars. And one of my good friends works on self-driving cars. He's not a big booster, but it's an interesting research problem. So you can see why lots of smart people work on it. And he said that he had this went to this track where they were testing the car, and he had his son in the back seat of the automated car, and it just felt wrong to him. And I feel like that's just one of those signs. And I think this is a great way to put it. It's like, would you like, once you take the technologist and say, do you trust it? At some point they know.
Correct. Although, I'm giving, I would give the self-driving car the benefit of the doubt that it might get to the point where, it's safer. If all the cars are, it's safer.
I think that's an amazing context switch that we always do.
Right, but it's a
So,
completely,
but it's just like you would never trust an AI doctor, but you might trust a self-driving car. And me, because
Right.
I'm a machine learning person, I just don't trust any of it.
Anyway,
No
okay,
AI.
fine. But what I'm saying is that they're very different things. I mean, in terms of, right, in terms of what the car has to do, it's very simple. I mean, in a way,
I think
the rules is really, I mean, there's only one goal, whereas in medicine, as you mentioned earlier,
yeah,
there are multiple critique, right? I mean,
they're hard for different reasons. That's the way I would say it.
Right,
Yeah, they're hard for different reasons.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But no, but of course, yeah, I mean, Tesla, which is, I guess, the way out in front in terms of AI, which has completely given up on LiDAR, right? Now they're using just visual AI to decide what to do. I mean, they have not, they are plateauing. I mean, if anything, the latest version of the Tesla in terms of their it's not like 2 years later or 4 years later, it's like,
no, it's actually I just
planet.
read they had another recall this morning, or the NTSB is after them for like the
Yeah,
fact
yeah,
that's like auto braking in bad ways.
Right. The summon
Right.
feature now is not anyway. There's issues, and and even Mr. Musk is realizing some of the limits of what AI is.
Yeah.
So there, I just want to come back to one other I mean, where we're going, right? So we've gone from, I mean, the field is so strange in cardiology, right? So we've gone from this paper, right, that in general has to do something that seems, to me, I was like, you know what, this may be doable. You have an EKG, right? The EKG has tons of stuff on. There's these tiny little shifts and this and that, and maybe I'm not seeing something. I'm not seeing some pattern. But a machine that goes through 100,000 EKGs and knows who's knows who ends up with a heart attack, maybe they can see something that I can't. All right. Yeah. And that's what the study was kind of.
Yeah.
Kind of. It was under 1,000.
But that's
important.
Right.
Yeah, of course the n is small, but maybe you can get it. But even that study, you almost get the sense that the people that are like doing the work in this space, certainly who are trying to bridge this gap between the world you live in and the clinical side of things, that they may not quite have, the boots may not quite be big enough to match, because
I think the other point there, which is interesting, is that they leave their own like stuff that they should know better. Like, I feel like when I read a lot of these articles,
right,
you just start to see that like things that I don't think most evidence-based physicians would do, they leave aside. Like, so if you look at the kind of, I mean, it's actually amazing to me. Like, you look at the FDA now approves AI assisted products, and I have the stat here. Like, I read a really interesting review that said that of the 130 products that were approved by the FDA under AI, 126 of them were based on retrospective studies.
Wow. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, we just completely lowered the bar. I mean, that like, now, only 4 prospective studies out of 130 products is crazy. And there's also this review that I read in the BMJ that said, let's see, this was in 2021 for mammography. It says that all point estimates of the accuracy of AI systems were inferior to those obtained by consensus of 2 radiologists. I mean, so it's just like, these are things that are out that were supposed to be better, and they're just not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
but it's weird. Instead of trying to get cleaner data, better data and stuff, you have like this next thing. So the next thing that was presented at this talk was Mayo researchers use AI to detect weak heart pump by a patient's AppleWatch EKGs.
Yeah.
Right. And literally 10 seconds later, the paper wasn't presented. At least the prior thing, they mentioned an ROC curve, though they didn't show the ROC curve from the paper. But they mentioned it. But then here they don't even mention anything. There's no ROC curve. Nothing is mentioned. And then the next step is, imagine the future where the Apple Watch will say, Mr. Smith, you have to take another dose of Lasix now. Mr. Smith, your insulin, you have to take more insulin because because this is wrong. I mean, I hear that and I'm like, holy crap, that's terrifying. I mean, 50% of the time I get it wrong when I try to. Well, I'm exaggerating slightly, since I'm still a doctor active in practice. I probably shouldn't be so cavalier, but no, I mean I worry every time I prescribe a diuretic to a patient who I believe is fluid overloaded. I'm sitting in the back of my mind, I'm like, all right, if things start to go the wrong way, I'm going to reverse course and do something else, right?
Absolutely.
And here you have the AppleWatch. That's, well, I mean, that literally is being presented in an academic conference to a bunch of other academics that, hey, the AppleWatch will tell you about, based on machine learning, there's this black box, blah, 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 AI. It knows more than you do. It knows more than you do. It's better than you. It will tell you how much to diurese the patient when they're ready and whatnot.
Yeah, but again, I think we need to be clear that it's, why would you prefer the human to make those decisions? Because do you think that, you think the human performs better? You can't put it on, it's the framework of performance or accuracy of performance or value of performance. They're all wrong. They're impossible because there's no gold standard. You were talked about at the beginning. You cannot judge the performance of the doctor in any, reliable algorithmic way. There's no equation that defines what a perfect performance of a doctor is in taking care of a patient. And so then what distinguishes a good doctor from a bad doctor, right? It becomes tricky to decide that, but it's tricky because the nature of the it's a medical relationship between a doctor and a patient, and it cannot be reduced to just quality of individual decisions at any time point.
And I think that's the other thing with this machine learning, right? We're talking about a single test.
Right.
Like a single diagnostic, right? There's all sorts of other stuff that has to happen. Just the accuracy of a single diagnostic against some weird, which we hinted at this before. I don't know how they evaluate true. Like, how do you actually compute these curves in the first place? It's a fuzzy kind of measure. This happens for diagnostic tests as well. Like, what is our standard that we compare against? It's very complicated, but I totally agree with you, Michelle, that like what is central here, so much of what we do. Sorry, let me step back to two things. First of all, even if you have a test, what you do with the test is complicated. Like, we know that you have to at least sort of think about prevalence before you move forward with a diagnosis. And this says nothing about prevalence, right? We can't go to a diagnosis without thinking about prevalence. And even there, this whole idea that I can take, like, I only use positive predictive value when I make a treatment is ridiculous, right?
Right.
There's no probability really, right? I don't know. This is this weird thing, right? The frequency of error is not the same as probability. Frequency and probability are different things, and so I don't know. That always strikes me as a weird part of what we do when we use Bayes' rule to try to come up with some actionable course for patients.
Michelle, you would hope. You would hope that from a simple rule, like somebody who manages to keep you out of the hospital, say, from fluid overload, perhaps, that's something that the patient would value over somebody who, for whatever reason ends up, with their management strategy and, you're in the hospital most of the time or something like that. Though it may be that the patient values the physician, who stays in close touch and who has a good relationship, regardless of how many days you're in the hospital or not. But I think that's what the other side, or that's what folks would say is like, there are certain metrics that would correlate with happiness, and maybe you could, but it's a great point that, of course, you can't reduce the physician-patient relationship to just something that's empiric, regardless of what it is. But I think it's still worthwhile making the point that the empirics themselves are complete crap. Well, are complete crap, right? I mean that doesn't. The 2 points can be made separately and are both important.
Yeah,
so,
I want to be charitable to the other side.
So when I looked at this, then I was like, oh my God, what is this Apple Watch? A Mayo, Mayo is doing the study to tell. I mean, how can an Apple Watch with a single lead EKG tell you that somebody is in heart failure or not?
Right.
And again,
so actually, let's talk about that, because I mean, it seems so egregious that the empirics are so bad compared to the claims.
Well, here,
right? I mean, that's, I mean, part of me wants to think that many of these people know that it's completely fanciful, but nevertheless, we push this because we have a healthcare system that we need to regiment, and we need to get right. I mean, these things become, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Ben, you said that there's no gold standard of diagnosis, and that's true, but then you can create one and then impose it on everybody.
Yeah.
And then you simplify the diagnostic process greatly, because then what doctors do is essentially mimic or try to mimic what the machine does. And then once that becomes the goal, then who needs the doctors? Right? I mean, if they need to train us to, if we need to be judged by the mechanical criteria, then you don't need human beings. You just need machines. Machines will always be better than human beings.
But first, tell us. I mean, before we can discuss why the egregious stuff is happening, Ben, I sent you this. I don't know if you had a chance to read it. So there's this whole AI LV dysfunction thing, and the Apple Watch will tell you if you should take a diuretic or not, or up your heart failure medicines, is based on this abstract. It's an abstract that was presented at Heart Rhythm.
I looked into this a little bit. There's this one of the authors, Paul Friedman, has been very active in using wearable devices in the context of medicine. So I actually found, I think this is actually a prospective study based on a retrospective study that they did that was in Nature Medicine. I think.
Yeah.
But it's still I haven't fully dug through this. Okay, go ahead.
This is the prospective thing. I'm just interested to hear your thoughts as a guy who does this. Basically does this for a living, right? They basically took they invited by email a bunch of folks, 3,884 people, 2,400 finally consented and downloaded the study app, and they all they basically had these folks all send EKGs at some different time point, right? And then in some patients, not in some patients, there was an echocardiogram that was ordered, an ultrasound of the heart that was ordered, and they then took a look at all those EKGs that they had accumulated in those 2,400 or 2,500 subjects, and they tried to see, okay, what it creates a model to predict who would have a low EF based on echo, and so there were 421 subjects. So from 2,500 we're down to 421 subjects who had at least one EKG within 30 days of an echocardiogram. Because of course, if the echo is done, 6 years after or whatever, 2 years after, then who knows if anything relates, right? Yeah. So they all had to have EKGs and an echo done within 30 days, and there were 421 of those people, right? Yeah. 16 of those 421 had an EF less than 40%.
Okay.
All right, that's 3%. And then 13 of the 16 low EF patients were identified by the Watch AI ECG. So, there's not much, there's not a tremendous amount here, of course, to be able to try to figure out. But you see, this is
there's the ROC curve.
Yeah, there's the ROC curve. But so basically, they used AI to figure out in these ages. But so what would your concerns be in this, based on, this is all that there is, there's nothing else. And that's what the figure is, that's what that headline is based on. And then that's what the speaker, the Grand Round speaker is basically saying, hey, look, this is going to be the next big thing.
Yeah. I guess I would ask both of you, why do you think this fraction ended up actually getting an echocardiogram?
They just randomly, right? They randomly happen to get an echocardiogram, or because for screening purposes, sometimes, or because they had an abnormal EKG. picked up by the Apple Watch.
Maybe picked up by the Apple Watch.
Right. So an Apple
Yeah.
Watch, if the Apple Watch said something that, oh, there's something wrong, and you end up at a cardiologist's office and the Apple Watch has something that's wrong, most cardiologists are going to say, okay, use that for the basis thing. I don't want to miss anything.
Yeah.
And do an echocardiogram. So
yeah. I mean, my worry is that there's some funky selection thing happening. That's my biggest worry here. Right. I mean, like why, like the fact that you down select by echocardiogram already is worrying to me. Just like you would have the same kind of worry in any kind of observational study, right? Like you have this post selection, and now you're going to go back and then do the prediction based on the post selection and try to make a broader claim, and that seems confounded.
Right. Also, of course,
you know what I mean?
the EFs, right? It's not. Of course, this is EF less than 40%, right? Which we don't have. There's what's called clinical heart failure, and then there's asymptomatic LV dysfunction that may have existed for a long time and stuff. And so, it's not necessarily going to lead you to some therapeutic thing, for sure. It would be nice to pick up folks that had an EF less than 40% if you could really do that with a single lead EKG. How would you make the statement? Would you make that statement based on this study? Or if you wanted to make a statement that was definitive that said, hey, we've developed, like if you were to develop some type of model based on thousands of EKGs and whatnot, and say, okay, I got this model and I'm confident it predicts EF. They've basically tried to validate it in this prospective thing. Are there other steps you would do? What is the best study that you would do to actually do this for us?
I'm going to read the abstract again to myself because I just want to look at exactly what happened here. I'm just curious as to what exactly happened in this enrollment. Are we sure that this is so hard? We're trying to read an abstract, right? I think that's really the big challenge, is that we're trying to make big claims based on an abstract and try to figure out what exactly happened. Because if you're going to do that study, you would want everybody to have an echo. I mean, that's just, you get everybody to enroll, which is already part of the problem. But once you've done that, you want everybody to have the echo, and then to see whether or not.
I think if I read it correctly, I think they just received a whole bunch, they don't say from how many subjects, but they've received a whole bunch of EKGs.
Yeah.
And then there were 400 subjects that had an echo within the 30 days that the EKG was received.
Right.
And then they got their proportion of, the Apple Watch could detect,
Right. And they had this model from before.
Good number of people.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's complicated, right?
It is complicated. But again, I mean, the claim is clearly, if it depends how you read it. They say it suggests an opportunity to use AI. Okay, fine. I mean, you can always suggest an opportunity to use AI.
No, but Ben's bringing up a good point. The point is that, of course, there's a significant, this is a carefully selected group. You're not doing an echo on the 20. There were 2,500 people who consented to download the app. A bunch of people sent EKGs. The only people that ultimately ended up being analyzed with the AI thing were folks who happened to get an echo for some reason. One of those reasons, by the way, could very well be that the Apple Watch is saying something, right? Maybe the Apple Watch is triggering for an arrhythmia, and they're showing up at cardiologist's office, and those are the folks that are getting the echoes, and the echoes are showing, something or the other.
No, but we don't. Right, but I mean, the claim is still pretty general here. It's not a claim. Right. But what strikes me is medicine, is healthcare in a rut, or is bad, or because of lack of data. I mean, it seems that the assumption that the more data we have, the better. The more data we have, the more we can correlate one set of data against another set of data.
That's the thing.
That's the thing. I mean, it's just this obsession with.
We know that's not true.
Right. Exactly.
We know, in fact, that if you have an observational study with millions of people, it's clearly not going to be good, right? But that's just Michelle, you said, right? Well, that was about actual trials. So it's probably even worse about observational studies, that their value is inversely proportional with the size. But who knows? Actually, maybe you get two people, and that's just an anecdote. That is a huge concern. And I think, again, if you look at the cases where we were able to have good results, it's not just that you just had large data sets, is you had really special data sets that have transformed machine learning. There's a famous one that's called ImageNet that's probably responsible for most of the current excitement that we're dealing with. ImageNet was 1 million images. No, actually, well, sorry, hold on a second. I always forget the number. It was millions.
Right.
But I think it was about a million or 1,300,000 images, 300,000 images that were like cleanly curated and annotated by Mechanical Turk and put into this really nice way so that people could build sophisticated models. It wasn't just that they collected the data and then had a free for all.
Let's talk about radiology, because I mean, I think that seems to be sort of the low hanging fruit, or at least, and obvious. I mean, if the computer can recognize the alphabet and Alexa can understand my speech,
let's go after radiologists,
right? So,
and again, like in 2016, we were told they would all be out of jobs by 2021.
Right. Yeah. So why do you think that didn't happen?
Yeah, it's a wonderful story. So there are a couple of things that are amazing there. So one of the people who was talking about radiologists being out of jobs was Andrew Ng, and he was doing that with regards to a paper that he had written on diagnosis from chest X-rays. It was later found out that in the data set that they used, one of the conditions they were looking at was a pneumothorax. Mm-hmm. And it turned out that 80% of the pneumothoraces in the data set had chest strains. So if you're looking at if you're looking at the image and you see a chest strain, I mean, I think you have a pretty clear, that's a pretty clear sign that as a physician could say, oh, that guy has a problem. Right? I think that's pretty evident. So what's interesting is they made claims that they were better than radiologists at detecting pneumothoraces. When you removed all the images with chest strains, they were then worse than med students.
Right.
And so it's just like machine learning could catch on in radiology. The big problem is that we don't really know what part of an image the machine learning is going to decide to be the pattern it wants to train to. And if it happens to be, it sees the chest strain really well and the pixels, that's not going to be useful. Right. That's incredibly sketchy.
But suppose we are, a new study is designed that's more careful and doesn't sort of.
Here we go.
Ahead, yeah.
So so this is a funny thing, right? So because we don't know what it latches to, we don't then know what happens when we slightly change our experimental setup. So this actually was leading to, but like my biggest problem with machine learning, and I think probably the most important thing I learned from my, working with my research group over the last 5 years, maybe more, is that machine learning has absolutely no external validity. It just has none. And I think this is a really important point to hammer home. So like we said at the beginning, pattern recognition tools take a retrospective data set and then make predictions. You have to guarantee, like all of the, wonderful machinery we've built assumes that the next data point is going to look like your retrospective data. And what we're finding more and more is that these models are incredibly sensitive to any kind of changes in the data. So there's a great study. I should find the name of the co-authors, but of the authors of this, there's a great study that shows that for radiology, you become sensitive to the machine, so that if you change machines, your accuracy drops. If you change hospitals, your accuracy drops.
Right.
And like that's the kind of thing where that kind of drop, and we don't really know how to fix that drop. That seems to be the thing that really throws the wrench into making this useful to everyone.
How does one evaluate these black boxes?
That's
I didn't mean to put you on the spot too much, but that's what I was kind of hoping to hear you say, is that, look, these guys, Freeman or whatnot, has this retrospective thing. They create some model, right? And then now they prospectively validate it, and they give these numbers, right? I mean, we have so much trouble getting data. Like look what happened in the Bangladesh mass study, right? I mean, thank goodness they put out the data, right? So that you could see how small, but if they hadn't put that data, we would just be kind of like, well, I guess, whatever. I mean, but so how do you, in the machine language, machine language community,
let me give the machine the benefit of the doubt. I mean, the machine can recognize the alphabet, right?
Yeah.
Okay. A machine can recognize the alphabet.
Well,
now, the alphabet is.
Let's be careful. Let's be careful. Actually, I think this is important. The machine could recognize handwritten digits on white background.
Okay.
We're good at that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, but controlled. Yeah.
Okay. Controlled. Yeah. But let's say, I mean, it recognizes. Now it does. Of course, it doesn't understand the meaning of the alphabet.
No.
It recognizes an A as being, something that it's been told before was an A, right?
Yeah,
and a B as a B, and so forth. Okay.
Yeah,
so conceivably, I think you could at least. I don't see theoretically why there would be an obstacle to having a machine recognize what I would call radiological diagnoses. A radiological diagnosis is a term that always followed by clinical correlation is required. Right?
Oh, yeah.
So I think theoretically, if you had sufficient, I mean, if you enrolled, if you conscripted an army of radiologists to read and got their images and trained, thousands of images and trained a machine in the context that radiologists currently work, I don't see. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see theoretically a problem with a machine being able to perform the way radiologists perform currently. Is that false or? Well,
no. I mean, this comes to this idea of the pixels have meaning by themselves. Meaning. So there's some if the black box calls this a pneumonia, right? And it's basing it on.
Yeah.
The problem is you and I don't know what exactly it is.
Correct, but I mean, radiologists make a mistake if they call pneumonia on chest X-ray. They should call it infiltrate, right?
Yeah.
They should say infiltrate. There's an infiltrate.
Yeah.
Clinical, infiltrate is present. Clinical correlation is required.
Right.
Yeah.
Or opacity, clinical correlation, or a space, fluid level, that sort of thing. So that I think that the machine can probably do that sort of thing.
Well, no, I mean, first of all, they'll say that
right,
no. Based on the pixels, we'll be able to say if it's a pneumonia or if it's heart failure and infusion. Both of them cause infiltrates, but one is this and one is that. And that's my point. And that's my question. That's the question to Ben is that, Ben, how do I get a guy like you to go into Freeman's black box and kick it around and see if it's really doing what they say it's doing?
What I think would be valuable, and this idea, I have a brilliant student named Deb Raji who has been pushing me on these ideas of evaluation. It's something she's been really passionate about. She's done a lot on auditing and verifying machine learning systems. And I think that like how we think about verifying these things, we have to kind of verify them in the context that they're used more than just verifying their inputs and outputs. I think like we would have to understand the whole workflow with in the loop of a whole patient
this is
hospital hospital interaction, because it's not going to just be with the physician either, right? I mean, you have the black box, you have the physician, you have the nursing staff, you have a whole other set of people who are involved in the care of a patient, and you have to figure out how to evaluate that whole context and figure out the value being served by adding this extra device.
This is going to be impossible. The only way to do it is to randomize somebody to an AI model versus a radiologist or Michelle and see outcome-wise who does better. How else would you do it?
That's a great question. So I was thinking there was an example I read about a epic sepsis detector that was just, it was doing the same kind of thing that would always happen. So it had its specificity was off, so it was just throwing alarms all the time, which apparently I've been told, I'm not a clinician, that all epic systems do is throw alarms. And so people would just get the alarm fatigue, and it didn't actually provide any value. It would just always tell you that the person was about to go into septic shock. So I think that was something we had to see, like in the context of the healthcare system, how exactly is this thing working? Now, is that what you typically do? That you say, I'm going to evaluate this device, I'm going to evaluate this system. The only way I could actually do that evaluation is with a randomized trial?
in this context, I don't know. There's no bioplausibility. I mean, what's the plausible? Because there's no way of figuring it out otherwise. I don't see how else you would do it. Whatever. It doesn't have to be an RCT. Like the epic sepsis thing is a great example. I totally forgot about it, right? And it's basically AI or pattern recognition or whatever.
Yeah.
It's where Epic went back. They have all this data, right? And Epic went back probably using an EHR code of sepsis, and or who knows what they did, right? And they developed some model that they said would then predict who would get sepsis and would label sepsis. And they did this in Michigan. The Michigan folks, I think, were annoyed because the Epic stuff was proprietary and it wasn't open, right? Yeah. So what did they do? They were like, all right, let's see how it works. And they found it missed I don't know, some massive number. 2/3 of sepsis was missed. Clinical sepsis was missed by the Epic model. So whatever. That's validation, I guess, right there. But before you even roll it out, right? In this particular case, it's not like the computers are treating the patients, right? You still have clinicians that are sitting around. Epic is just generating some stupid alarm saying, "Hey, sepsis."
Yeah.
But if you roll this out, if you're trying to roll out a prediction model which is going to decide who should get a diuretic or who should get a heart failure med or not, is there any other way to validate that other than to look at some outcome that matters and have a human figure that out?
I think it's fascinating. Like if you have any device, and you want typically FDA approval requires at least a non-inferiority trial, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure why software should be different, but this is the policy question that I think gets very tricky. Why should, if your AI sounds fancy, let's just call it a computer program, right? And to be clear, I think this is the fascinating thing with radiology, right? In radiology, you're not actually seeing an image, right? When I look at an MRI, that's not like what it actually looks like inside somebody's body, right? You're seeing some representation, right? That we don't really have a good way of verifying either. I've heard anecdotal stories about people who work on these things where they think that they've made much nicer looking high contrast MRIs, and the radiologists are like, I kind of like the noisy one better. I could see more, because it's not the representation that they see, that we all see when we look at these things, is only as valuable as the downstream way that we use it. So it's black box for most people. I don't how an MRI turns into a image of your brain or something, right?
Yeah.
But it has diagnostic value nonetheless.
Right. Except there's some mental model of what the brain should look like and what heart structures are. There's this idea that if you showed me an MRI, and it was whack, in terms of the heart, I'd be like,
you'd be like, okay,
you guys, weird. I don't know what happened, but you effed up something, because I know what the heart looks like. We see it on ultrasound. Anyway,
I think that's also the interesting thing with the idea that you would eliminate radiologists, is that again, the thing that we look at, if we're looking at an MRI or a CT, you could reduce it down to one number of a diagnosis. But the fact that you leave it as a lot of numbers, that two doctors can look at it on a screen and say, okay, no, I think I'm seeing this. You have some kind of thing to interrogate. It's a larger set of data. The fact that it's more data is actually better than a single number.
Right.
That buys you value. And I think the same is true in tests, like we were just talking about. You could have something that just thresholds troponin and gives it a diagnostic. But I don't think either of you would want that. You actually want the number, because you're going to use that in context of a lot of other things.
Right.
So
we should explode the idea that I think permeates through many people, that there is information in pixels.
I don't like that.
It'd be this idea that I do echoes all the time, ultrasounds of the heart, and sometimes, man, these pictures are so difficult, and I'm just like, you know what? I think I can grossly say this, but if I really want to make an actionable thing, I'm going to send them for another test, because I'm not comfortable making some big decision based on an echo with poor images. Now, there's people out there that say, no, AI will fix that. AI will tell you where to put your probe, anyway, whatever. And then even if the image is technically difficult, AI will give you clean information. How do you get, you have a paper out, it's somewhat of a validation paper. And you have a picture of a lakeshore, right? Or actually, it's a picture of it's a picture of a body of water, not a lakeshore. Picture of a body of water, and the point is that there's not enough information in the picture to differentiate this between a lake and like the ocean.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, AI cannot. I mean, is there some way that can you explain to me how AI could produce something that isn't there?
Well, I think the fun part, right? I mean, all we ever get, I mean, as much as people would love to give artificial intelligence these amazing powers, you know, I think there are the advances that have happened that are not just going to be computers getting faster or data sets getting bigger, are people being clever about what a diagnosis or a label is, right? Well, because you know, you need a set of covariates on which you're going to make a decision, and then you need that thing that you're this target, whether it is a diagnostic, it's a label, it's whatever you have it. And I think that we would have to be creative about how we annotate cases to be able to differentiate between a lakeshore and a seashore. But the main point is that cleverness is not going to come from the computer. That cleverness is going to come from some research team that, you know, does the hard work, thinks about what would be clinically relevant, comes up with the right experiment and tests it. And I think the proof is in that kind of pudding, right? I mean, the technology to maybe do that from a bunch of examples and a bunch of health records, it could be there, but it's going to just take human ingenuity to make that work.
Yeah. So a technically difficult image, converting that into something that's clinically real, or an image that doesn't have all the information that you typically would need.
Yeah.
Like you would need some human ingenuity to figure out, okay, these are the patterns in this image that could convert it to this. I mean,
right.
But
right. No, I mean, like
AI can't come. AI
example
can't
that's an example that comes to mind for me is I was Venk Murthy has something about a very particular kind of CT. I'm trying to blanking on this. Venk's gonna be mad because I forgot the name of the name of the diagnostic that he was doing. But there's a very particular kind of CT. It's again for diagnosing
PET CT or
PET CT. Thank you.
FFR or no PET CT.
I'm pretty sure it might be PET, but it's for diagnosing
cancers or
no. This is for some kind of heart disease.
Okay, it's probably. I mean, it's either and it's some black box algorithm.
No. It's fine. It's just that it has artifacts, and in order to remove the artifacts, you kind of need a secondary system. So, like, I think they're doing single photon CT for one thing, and then you have to do some more complicated thing to actually get the artifacts. And what Venk did is he just said, well, I could learn how to remove the artifacts using machine learning. We could use machine learning to remove the artifacts. To me, that's a cool and ingenious sort of approach. And I'm apologetic that I can't remember all the details, and you'll have to have him on and he can explain it, right? But like, so there, it's a scoped, bounded problem where the original image doesn't have the information you want. The image you do want would require a $500,000 machine. Maybe we could have a computer program that does machine learning to remove that $500,000 machine. That seems plausible to me. Right. And that's a much less lofty goal than like replacing radiologists or replacing, you know, it's a different goal. And I think having those kind of well-scoped goals is what will keep these kind of techniques useful.
Yeah. And that's a bounded problem. It's kind of like Alexa and Siri, right? Those are bounded problems. Like, you know,
but
you have
valuable problems, right?
Right.
Super
right.
valuable.
No, super valuable. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I mean, the big problems. So the reason, the big problems you see with AI in medicine right now, in terms of it going somewhere, is one, you've said external validity, correct?
That's the biggest one, and that's actually a huge thing that hampers a lot of machine learning, is external validity. I mean, even with Alexa still has issues with people who have non-American accents.
Right.
So right, that's an external validity issue that they're still working on.
Yeah. And how will they solve that issue?
I think they're just going to have to collect a lot of data in all the different regions. And then you somehow have to either you're going to have that thing, like, you know, how on televisions, you could tell it where you are, and then it changes what it's going to do based on what region it's in. You could have, but my guess is there will be a clever engineering solution rather than like some amazing AI breakthrough. They'll figure out something. Because a clever engineering solution is just as good. It doesn't matter. If it feels like magic to the person on the other side who cares what
Right.
it actually is doing?
Right. The other big problem seems to be the fact that it's just not a data problem. You can't just it's not that more data points that you accrue are going to be important, especially when you're talking about medicine, in part because the data is so unclean, right? I mean, that seems to be
I think that's another huge issue. And I think this is a problem. What makes medicine hard in general.
Yeah.
It's like, it's
Right.
not like medicine. I think another way to think about it, right? I said this at the beginning, right? You should I would advise using machine learning when you have an unambiguous answer and the stakes are low. And I really would like that to be and, not or, but we need at least one. And so the problem with medicine is the answers are often very ambiguous and the stakes are often very high. And I think in that context, I don't think the technology is ready.
How much of the hype was predicated on the notion that the EHRs would be useful tools when we know that the EHRs are really pretty bad, as we talked about earlier?
I think when they were talking about radiology, they just figured the radiology would be fine. You know, they're like, an image is an image.
Right.
But I think there is this weird leap that like images captured by cell phones are not the same as images captured by X-ray or CT or MRI. They're just not. And it feels fundamentally like they should work the same, but you know, the MRI,
although aren't they slim? I mean, the MRI, aren't they more sort of controlled and
right, you should be better, right?
Right,
but
should be,
but
right.
I think the complicated thing is like to get an MRI, you have a person, you know, you have a person in a tube, is really uncomfortable for them. So you already have this issue of like not being able to get them in there for the time that you want. And then, you know, even with the technology that we have now, you have this bizarre indirect measurement of their geometry through how their water molecules are aligning, right? I mean, it's a very crazy thing that MRI is like, and from that we get 3D slices through the body. Like what a weird, amazing innovation. And just to think that like you could take the output of that and that's an image and then I could just run through it and get diagnostics out. I mean, I think even when you look at, like, I think Anish mentioned earlier, you know, you can get back imaging from radiology that's just not good enough, right? Not good enough to make the diagnosis you want. And you have to do something else. And I think that's part of the issue.
Right. And you know, you're aware of this debate with in radiology about whether a radiologist should read an image with the benefit of the most clinical context versus reading it completely blind of the clinical context.
Ooh.
Right. I mean, you can see the arguments for either side.
Yeah.
You can see a radiologist being able to extract more useful information if he knows more about the patient. On the other hand, he might miss information. He might be biased by the clinical context, right? Because sometimes the clinical context biases you into missing something that's a clue that's in the image that you wouldn't get. If
it's interesting in the
sort of unbiased.
In the study that we looked at earlier with the ROC curve, I didn't like. They did add clinically relevant information to the ECG, and it didn't make a difference in that particular study. But you could totally imagine cases where it would. That's very interesting that would somehow cause bias. No, for better or for worse, not clear.
Right. We don't know.
No, and I'm even further upstream where I think that, you know, when if the cardiologist who is seeing a particular patient with a certain issue who's worried about a certain diagnosis, if they do their own imaging study, right? MRI, of course, is one standard protocol. Well, generally one standard protocol or something, right? But we're doing an ultrasound, right? There's 56 or 50, 60 different views you can get. What do you focus in on? Right now, the model is that you say, hey, technologist, I need an echo, and the technologist comes and does an echo, and they go through the standard frames. Sometimes you'll put in, hey, specifically look for this, right? But most of the time, Michelle, as you know, the vast majority of the time, everyone is getting a standard protocol set of echoes, right? But if you're the cardiologist doing the echo and you're concerned about certain things, like say, and you can put in that information about, hey, the EKGs show something on the inferior leads. Hey, this person has, you know, this person has pain that's more going to their back and the blood pressures are a little different. Maybe I should take a closer look and take more images. Right now, when they do echoes, you take typically 3 beats, right? 3 beats at a time. That's your clip, and then you have a bunch of 60 or so images. Each of them are 3 clips, right? And so there's a lot of information that's thrown away as the sonographer is kind of sweeping through all this stuff, because he or she is just trying to get through and get through study. But if you're the clinical consultant that is concerned about something specific, you may only do 20 images, but you're focused in on one thing that you're clinically concerned about. So again, it becomes super, super hard to apply.
I think that's another really important point. And people have tried to study that aspect in machine learning, but again, this is all much more research than deployed technology. Is like if you're seeking particular information, that's going to change the data you look for.
Right.
It's not as simple as that. There's a one purpose diagnostic that's going to come out.
Yeah.
And how you get, I don't know how you would ever get the machine to tell you, hey, no, I should look for that. That would be a big dream. That's a pipe dream, but
yeah, it seems like AI has a lot. AI has kind of, there's a branch of AI now that is very focused on low resource areas and trying to get a lot of information from low resource areas. So it's one thing to have a cardiologist or a sonographer who's highly experienced in an ER doing an echocardiogram on somebody with chest pain. It's a totally other thing to have somebody in, say, Nepal, where maybe the highest level of training person is a nurse, and now all they have is a little ultrasound probe that's handheld. And they're not very well trained, but AI is saying, people who promote AI is saying, hey, with our AI and your hand on the probe, we are going to create beautiful images and get clean information. Again, to me, that seems like a pretty tall leap. Like, it's coming at you're trying to get, the question is, can you get a cardiologist doing an echo, or whatever, some experienced person doing an echo versus some low-level untrained person with the same technology? Can AI improve them to be, some expert with that probe?
I don't know. That's the thing. I don't think
the problem is that frequently they won't compare those two scenarios. They'll compare, the unskilled worker doing the echo and having AI interpret versus not having the echo at all, right? So they say, okay, AI, great, bridges a gap that wasn't there before.
Yeah,
but it's not a claim on AI. It's just a claim on.
I am, and getting back to Michelle's original point about why this is happening. The gatekeepers for all of this, because I don't think lay folks are going to be can parse all this stuff. The gatekeepers of all this should really be academia. Yet academia seems to be bought into much of this hype and seems to be pushing and promoting it. So why
it is funny. I brought up Jeff Hinton and Andrew Ng, and I like calling out people by names because it's important, because I don't understand why they do this. There's another famous machine learning person named Jan LeCun, and Jan said that he said this a while ago, and I think it will be self-fulfilling eventually, but like machine learning is the only field, or AI is the only field that has been killed by hype 4 times in the last 50 years. It keeps coming back, but it really, every time, it's just a constant cycle of over-promising and under-delivering. At this point, it's delivered a lot. I think it's delivered a lot. I think that the technology is neat, and yet we can't be happy with that. Like, why can't we just be happy with like what? So I don't believe, and Michelle, we could talk about this at some point later. I don't believe self-driving cars will be a thing. And that's overpromised. Just really quickly, the reason why is because if you want self-driving cars to be a thing, you have to get people out of the way of them. Because if there are people at all in the way, that becomes complicated. And once you get people out of the way, they should have their own lanes. And once they have their own lanes, you might as well platoon them together. And next thing you know, you have public transportation, which would have been a perfectly fine solution in the first place. But America has this crazy car fixation, so we can't see past it. But anyway, so I don't think the self-driving car thing, I think it's very hard. I think the AI medicine thing is hard. I think Alexa is something that makes a lot of people happy. Voice control makes a lot of people happy, and we should embrace it. I think check readers, optical character recognition makes a lot of people happy, and it works really well. And that's a success story that we should embrace. And I feel like in both those cases, and I also think like, even the suggestions that Google Docs makes, it can be annoying, but sometimes you get, if you have writer's block, it's kind of fun to keep that on and just like do the opposite of what it says, right? It's a kind of a cute thing. In all those cases, like the stakes aren't high if Alexa or Siri says something stupid. You're like, all right, that's a stupid thing. And the stakes aren't particularly high if the Google autocomplete doesn't, comes up with a dumb word. Although, oftentimes Google autocomplete comes up with like racist or horrible answers, and they've worked really hard to remove those kinds of things. So, as long as it's not doing that, those stakes are low. And I think those are great cases where, this technology, it does really cool stuff. And I could even come up with examples which are slightly more, maybe less fanciful, not fanciful, what's the word? Well, whatever, like trivial, that where machine learning could deliver some value. I just feel like, well, why do we have to go and then jump the shark all the time and then promise stuff that we're never going to deliver? This is something it doesn't fit my temperament. You will have to find the person to do the psychoanalyst.
That seems to be characteristic of healthcare in general, whether you're talking about devices or drugs or AI or
that's true. Maybe the only people who overpromise more is in healthcare. It could be true,
right?
A lot of people,
so, to some extent.
We're gonna cure all diseases. No, that's
right.
Just Zuckerberg thinks that.
Well, but I mean, the market should be the market. Well, I guess the market doesn't. I mean, that we brought up the analogy of Theranos, right? Theranos was a literal, like a physical black box that was that was completely like there was nothing in it, or I don't know, there was like hamsters in it or something like that. But and that went on, that charade went on for a long time, and then it failed. You were talking about this, I guess. I mean, I guess I'm still curious why in academia, right? I mean, is it because there's no incentive for?
Well, I think it's also a little complicated that the lines between just like in biology, the lines between industrial pharma and academia got blurred. The same thing happened to computer science. Once there was money, everybody was moving back and forth. So you had Jeff Hinton, who keep bringing up these big names. They win Turing Awards, so whatever. But Jeff Hinton, Jan LeCun, they win Turing Awards. Jan spends most of his time at Facebook. Jeff spent for a long time was going back and forth from Toronto and Google. And so and there are lots of other names of people I could run down. I've spent time at Google, right? That you just start to have this bleed, and I think industry has not been better. Like you'll get, so I think once that line gets blurry, it gets hard to hear the people like me. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm one of the doomsayers. That's just, and everybody knows it. I'm like, none of this works. I get to be the hater. There are a few of us out there who are like, why are you guys talking this way? But if this is like Oscar Wilde, right? Why would you, if your paycheck depends on it, why would you go and say that this stuff doesn't work? The incentives to be tempered and reasonable and honest, unfortunately, aren't there. And I think that this is the tricky part. As much as we'd love to think, I mean, nobody believes that academia actually is an ivory tower that's resistant from market forces. I mean, these guys want. I think what's funny is it's not just that they want grants, right? It's like they're offered crazy salaries too. There's a lot of benefit that comes from talking it up rather than talking it down.
So interesting. Jeffrey Hinton, he has a really interesting, I don't know if you know some of his, he apparently moved to Canada. I don't know if this is true. He moved to Canada because he didn't like Ronald Reagan and he didn't like the military funding of AI.
No way. Is that true?
I mean, that's what's on the web. So,
I don't know. I don't know if I trust the internet. I don't know, but it could be true. Could be true.
Yeah.
I think, I think again, like all these people, they're all, as is always the case with the people who get lionized, they're all just humans.
What the good news with all this doomsaying is that I feel a lot better. Elon Musk is always very concerned about AI and how, the Terminator will become reality. I think I've heard him say less of that as he's had as Tesla has struggled with the whole.
Yes.
So
Right.
maybe
Exactly.
we are not going to be eliminated by AI and robots
Well,
anytime soon.
I
So
always
he's
found
trying
that
to-
amazing because he was simultaneously predicting self-driving cars, and he was predicting, the singularity and all that stuff. And then, you get into a Tesla and be terrified. And, the lane following technology has gotten better, but it's like,
Right.
I don't know. I never understood.
But I mean, there's so much ambiguity or ambivalence about even the terms, right? I mean, so AI, I mean, circling back to what you were saying, I mean, we could do another podcast on the meaning of pattern recognition. I mean, right? So there are many terms. Actually, maybe you should do that on another podcast, because I think it's interesting.
I would love to come back
To determine, distinguish
talking to you.
between pattern recognition, the question of causal inference,
Yeah.
the question of intelligence in general, learning, what does that mean? So we apply all these human terms to machines.
Yeah.
To what extent there's a sort of a distortion of the meaning when it gets translated that way.
Well, I love, I mean, so much in that. Yeah, it is probably a much longer conversation. I'd say quickly, like the anthropomorphism, I do think is the problem. Like the fact that we called it intelligence, that we called it even recognition, right? I like to push back and say there was a book I love from the 70s that called it pattern classification.
Sorting, right? It's a sorting process.
Sorting,
right?
Like, it's like,
exactly.
let's try to be a bit more humble.
Right.
The other thing you said has been something that's been tripping me up all week, is this weird flipping back and forth between causal interpretations of predictive models and predictive interpretations. Like they really, you write the same equation down if you're going to do causal inference as if you're going to do linear regression, and yet they mean completely different things. Another thing that trips everybody out, and I'm sure this trips out, I know for a fact this trips up doctors, is the conflation of rate and probability. And this is a crazy thing that actually I still don't even understand what people want in clinical practice. When we prevalence of a disease is a rate, right? False positive rate is a rate. Sensitivity and specificity are rates. All they're doing is they just take the number of times something happens and divide it by the total number of times. It gives you a number between 0 and 1. Why are those probabilities? Probability would be, is something about how much I believe an event is going to occur. It's like some kind of like the psychology of that is very weird. Like how we relate to what a probability is.
We had several episodes with Mike Akery, who wrote a book. I don't know if I mentioned him to you.
No.
On precisely that. I mean, essentially the question of this conflation, which I think has been known in the world of philosophy of statistics and philosophy of science.
Yes.
The conflation between the belief, rather the probability as a degree of belief versus probability as a frequency, or as a number, and what and all, and beyond that, exactly what you were saying. I mean, why do we interpret the frequency as a probability?
But even there, I think that just because I wasn't even saying as a frequentist, I think you could talk about, there's this whole frequentist statistics, which is coin flipping, and what we do in randomized trials. And that's fine by me. That's probabilistic because, there's a random element. I think that there are frequencies that are not random.
Right.
There are frequencies that are not random. So just a stupid example that, I could give you the prevalence of breast cancer in all people, but that's like we know that's silly because we know it predominantly affects women.
Right.
And so that rate in all people can't be turned into some kind of positive predictive value. That's a very silly example, but from that you get all sorts of stuff that comes out. So
it's not silly at all, because I literally used that same example when discussing vaccine associated myocarditis and how massively different the rates are in men versus women. Yet, the conversation, in mainstream media for a while, and a lot of places, a lot of experts and stuff was like, my God, it's not an issue at all. It's like, holy canoe, hello, 18 to 29-year-old boys, focus on the rate there. It means nothing. And I think I use that analogy. It's like trying to come up with some mass screening strategy for mammograms using the average rate of breast cancer in men and women. It's like, what is the point of that?
Insane.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
all right. Well, yeah, we've taken up tons of your time,
No, it's
and
fun.
this has been a fantastic conversation. We could go on for a while because you're so much fun to talk to. But
Great.
just wrapping up, general advice as a machine learning expert, doomsayer, machine learning expert. We'll stop there. What words of advice do you have for clinicians, cardiology clinicians who are faced with and kind of inundated with, the hype of AI in medicine?
Yeah, I think physicians have to, have to decide together, like, what do they want from computing technology in the hospital? How is that going to improve care? And I think that's the first thing. Machine learning, AI or not, like, how are computers going to make patients' lives better? Honestly, physicians' lives better. Like, that's, I think, the question. And then from there, you could move forward. Now, that said, the FDA is letting a lot of this stuff through. And maybe I could close with, there is a wonderful quote by this fellow, James Mickens from Harvard. He gave a great keynote talk about machine learning at a security conference a few years ago. And this was his advice to everybody in the room. And I think it's a good advice for physicians too, when it comes to machine learning. And he said that he could give the advice in 3 words: is think before deploying. I think is fair. He says in 2 words, think first. And in 1 word, don't. And I stuck with me. I was like, James said it better than I ever could have.
So great. Well, Ben, thanks so much. It was really, really great for you. You came on on a very short notice. So, and thanks for all the time, and thanks for the conversation. It's been great to find you. Your Twitter handle for folks
is it at Ben Recht, but it's spelled in a goofy way, BENWREKT. But you can also find my academic side, which is less, a little bit more professional. If you go to the electrical engineering and computer sciences department at Berkeley, my webpage is there. And
we'll have that on the show notes, including a link to your book.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ben.
Thanks,
Thank
Ben.
you, guys.